Our Parish Council for supporting this event. I welcome you all to meet my dear friend, Father Nicholas de la Veras. He is a wonderful, wonderful guy. He is a classmate of mine at the seminary. We were neighbors. We spent a lot of time together. And he is, what's your degree? Which one? And he's a very degreed gentleman, but he specializes in addictions and addiction counseling. And so I've asked him to come here tonight because whether we like to admit it in our lives or not, many of us have a friend, a relative, a direct member of our family that does have an addiction issue. We may not even realize that we have an addiction issue. We may think that addictions are isolated to drugs and alcohol when they're really not. Many of the things we're addicted to, number one being our phone, and number two are things that we can go and see on our phone. So there's a lot of different addictions. I am extremely addicted right now to coffee, and I will not get out of bed if I don't smell it brewed before I wake up. So that's something to maybe work on for Great Holy Land, is to cook coffee, but I don't know if I'll make it. But anyway, so I'd like to welcome Father Nicholas. He will introduce himself and his background. He is working with the Archdiocese of America to start this St. Anastasia Fellowship, specializing and centralizing around addiction. So I thank you. I love you. He's been a very dear friend. He's a very supportive friend. He's somebody I can call, and he will give me great, honest advice, and he'll tell me when I'm wrong. So, welcome.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you all so much for being here this evening. I am humbled by the turnout, to say the least. I'm humbled by one person turning out, but I know that it's like Father Tom said, you know, it's not about really me, but it's really about what it is that we're talking about this evening. And so before we get cranked up here, I just I want to bring forward this notion, and it's something that I would ask each and every one of us try and begin this journey together with. And the notion is this: challenge what you think you know about addiction. Challenge it, really and truly challenge it, because like Father Tom had said, you know, I think we have this idea of what addiction is. I think we also have this idea that accompanies who it is that suffers from addiction. But you know, if we really examine what it is that addiction is, I could cite all different kinds of books for you and different kinds of studies that really kind of highlight and bring about this notion of what is addiction. I think we're going to find pretty quickly that each and every one of us has some kind of personal experience with addiction. If not with ourselves, at least with somebody who is near and dear to us. The recent statistic, that's a beautiful ringtone. Sorry. I feel like I should have started with that. But the recent statistic is post-COVID that 1 in 3, okay, 1 in 3 is the number of individuals who are directly affected by addiction, which is to say that they themselves are addicted. There's a book that recently came out that I do want to bring to your attention just since we're on the topic. And that book is called The Anxious Generation. Is anybody here familiar with that book? Father Tom has heard me talk about it. I think he even has a copy in his car right now that's riding back seat. Hopefully that rides front seat soon. But The Anxious Generation is a book that I've recently really attached to just because it kind of culminates a lot of what we've already thought about and kind of brought together a compilation of knowledge that now lets us say that we know about it. And what this is really about is the Gen Z, those who have grown up with these little phones that we carry around with us, and how that little phone has affected their mental health, how that little phone has affected their relationships, how that little phone has affected the way that they interact, what their expectations are, all of these different kinds of things. And when we really get down into it, what we find is that this is one of the first generations that we can look at where we can say without any doubt that we have raised up an addicted generation. Right? We have raised up an addicted generation. And again, it's the first time in human history that we can say this. And so again, where that little phone inside of our pocket takes us, if it takes us to a place that leads to gambling, if it takes us to a place that leads to shopping, if it takes us to a place that leads to something like pornography, if it takes us to a place that leads us to something like social media, wherever that place is that we're going to, and ultimately cutting off interaction with real life people, that place is the place of addiction. So we'll start there by saying, challenge what you know about addiction, because what's going to be brought forward within this presentation today, Father Tom kind of asked me to come and give more of an addictions awareness seminar than anything else. And so I'd really like to make that a discussion. So the first thing that I want to kind of start with is hear about what you all think addiction is. And I want you to just put it into one word. Addiction is. It's only going to work if you say something. What? One at a time. Yeah, go ahead.
Distracting.
Distracting, absolutely. For sure. Addiction is distracting.
Reliance.
Reliance, very good. Absolutely. Addiction is. Habits. Okay, for sure. Yep, for sure. Addiction is. Frustrating. You better believe it. For sure.
Expensive.
Expensive. 100%.
Illness.
Yes.
Destructive.
Destructive. Very good. One more.
Illness.
An illness. Absolutely. For sure.
Time consuming.
Time consuming. Man, down in California, I gotta say, this is the most interactive addiction is group that I've had so far. Very good. Awesome. So these are some really great answers that you've given. I'm gonna put up there some kind of like our top, I did like a top 9 just because I feel like top 10's overplayed. You know, we lose track when we start counting 10. So top 9 here. Some of yours are up there. Overwhelming, destructive, compulsive, uncontrollable, problematic, harmful, contagious, evil, enslaving. So we're going to move on then to the question, addiction isn't. So now, in this answer, we're going to avoid using antonyms, okay? That's already up there. And again, thinking along the lines of just like, what isn't addiction? What can we think of that maybe comes to mind of, you know, again, something that's not necessarily just the opposite of what addiction is, but more along the lines of what doesn't it do for us? What doesn't it? What isn't it in this kind of existence of right life? Addiction isn't. Addiction isn't healthy. Very good. Absolutely. Addiction isn't fulfilling. Beautifully stated. Yeah. Absolutely. Satisfying. Yep, for sure. Addiction isn't embarrassing. Okay.
I don't think it's all
Yeah. Tell me.
shameful, like the stigma that should be released.
Oh, okay. You're thinking hopeful. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah. So hopefully addiction isn't bringing this to this place of shame. But I would say that for most people it is. Right. Yeah, for sure. Okay. Yeah. I think less hopeful. Anybody else? Addiction isn't. Empowering. Very good. Yes. In the back there? Gambling. Addiction isn't gambling. I'm sorry to say addiction and gambling are one and the same. For sure. Addiction isn't profitable. Very good.
Productive.
Addiction isn't reductive.
Productive.
Productive. Oh, productive. Yeah, all right. Reductive. I was wondering where we were going. For sure. Productive. Addiction isn't productive. Very good. Okay. These are some great answers. Some of yours are up there again. Chosen, incurable, easy, insignificant, forgiving, rewarding, obvious. I heard it right there. Very good. Absolutely. Addiction isn't obvious, right? It's not discriminatory either, right? So going back to kind of our introduction here, recognizing that the people who we're sitting at the table with, right? The people who we're sitting at the table with, look who you're sitting at the table with. These are the faces of addiction. The person standing in front of you. The person standing in front of you. This is a face capable of addiction. Right? Okay? Really and truly. So, addiction isn't rational. All right. Thinking verbs here. Thinking verbs. Addiction does. What does addiction do? And again, what we're doing here is we're really fine-tuning, right? Our understanding, our collective understanding here. Challenging some of those thinkings about addiction and asking ourselves, now that we've got this list here of what addiction is, what addiction isn't, what can we say that addiction does? Destroys, for sure.
Kills.
Kills, absolutely. Yes. Deprives. Oh, what would divides? Divides. Absolutely. Absolutely. Addiction divides. Addiction what? Distracts. Okay. For sure. Yeah. Addiction. What else does it do?
Keeps us stuck.
Keeps us stuck. Can you think of one word that says keeps us stuck?
Isolates.
Isolates. Very good. Very nice word. Bingo. Any more? All right, let's reveal the top 9 here. It's like Family Feud, isn't it? It's great. Addiction manipulates, numbs, isolates, divides, we had that. Distract, we had that. Very good. Ruins, consumes, oppresses, and degrades. Okay? So, when we look at this list up here, maybe our minds are already changing a little bit. Maybe we're already kind of thinking twice about what we think about addiction. Maybe we're looking at this list and we're thinking even about some of the habits or behaviors in our lives. And we're asking ourselves, whoa, wow, you know, this thing that I'm thinking of, it kind of checks a lot of those boxes. So what I want to do now is I want to come up with 3 different definitions that we can all agree on based on those lists that we made. And the first of those is one where I'm going to go to our diagnostician's manual, right? The DSM-5. I'm a DSM-5 guy for any of you psychologist people or psychiatrist people out there. I didn't go past the DSM-5. I don't think there's any need to, and it's okay if you're a DSM-6 guy. That's all right. I'm in full support of DSM-6, as I'm in full support of DSM-4. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, then that's perfectly fine. Remain ignorant and blissful. Okay? And just follow me here through this journey. Right, so this is the clinical definition, right? And the clinical definition provides for us 11 points which we can kind of go through this list. And what we do as diagnosticians in order to figure out, is this somebody who is suffering or struggling with addiction, is we go through this list of 11 points and we say, okay, you are suffering from 3 out of the 11. Okay, we can say that you have kind of a mild, maybe we'll say the issue is alcohol, right? We'll say you have kind of like a mild alcohol use disorder, right? And so in even the way that we talk about this, something else that we need to clarify, and I think just because it's going to apply very much so to the clinical definition that we're going to provide here, is that the formula is as follows. Use is not always abuse. Abuse is not always addiction. But they are related. All are related to each other, right? And so the frequency of use, as we're going to come to find here, is what's going to help us determine, is it an abuse? what I can almost guarantee is that most of that generation that we were talking about before, the good Gen Zers, okay, the Zoomers, don't feel bad, guys. I know you're out there. It's all right. Most of that generation, we've already qualified as abusers of technology. Abusers of technology, right? Because again, when we think about what is an abuse is somebody who's going to go through this list here that we're about to provide, and you're already looking at scoring 5 and up, right? So you're checking 5 and up of these boxes, right? Addiction is 7 and up, okay? And again, it's not to say that it's like this box that we're trying to fit everybody in, or that if you're not in that 7 and up, it's not addiction. Or if you're not in that 5 and up, it's not abuse. Or if you're not in that 3 and up, it's not a use disorder, right? But what we are saying is that this is something we should probably look at, okay? So the first of this is hazardous use. So again, thinking along those lines of those little phones inside of your pockets. You're all lying to me if you don't raise your hand. I know you are. How many of you have not picked up those dang phones while you're driving? Thank you. Thank you for some honesty here. Oh, you don't drive. All right. There we go. All right. So, this is hazardous use. Right? This is hazardous use. So, I think effectively, everybody who drives in this room and has picked up that phone while we are driving has engaged in hazardous use. Right? It's hazardous. We know that it's hazardous. We know when we're doing it that it's hazardous. We know that that text message that I'm sending to my wife, pick up peanut butter, right? That could be my last text messages. How stupid. How stupid, right? Pick up peanut butter. And then that was the end of Father Nico. Could you imagine? Could you imagine? Hazardous use. Okay. I won't give an example for everyone. Social interpersonal issues. Okay, so again, this is any time that device comes in between me and another person. Anytime that device comes in between me and another person. So, how many of us in here are checking off 2 boxes already? I know I am, right? Okay, social and interpersonal use. Okay, which means, again, this is something that's invading something that is sacred, right? And that's what this is really all about. It's invading a sacred space. Neglected major roles. Yep, I've definitely done that, right? Watch those YouTube videos when I should be parenting, for sure. Absolutely, absolutely, for sure, right? Okay, we'll keep going. Withdrawal, okay? So again, if we're talking about those little devices, we're thinking about them even though we're not with them. Right? We're thinking about them even though we're not with them. Tolerance. In other words, when it was new, we were spending maybe an hour a day with it. But now that it's become a part of our lives, we're inseparable from it. We're spending 5-6 hours of our day out of it, not even realizing it. That's tolerance. But again, going more towards the category of substance use, this is even easier to give an example of, right? Because building up that tolerance is the equivalency of, feeling a little bit buzzed off of one beer to needing an entire case. Use longer and larger amounts. So this is different than tolerance, right? And we want to distinguish between tolerance and used for longer and larger amounts. Because again, when we're talking about tolerance, we're saying that in order for me to get my fix, right, I need to use more, right? In order for me to get to that place where I am enjoying or wanting, getting out of the experience, what I'm wanting to get out of it, even though it's a bottomless pit, right? I'm needing to use more. But with the whole used longer and larger amounts, what we're saying is that this is also acknowledged as taking place over a period of time and in a quantifiable amount, right? So essentially what we're saying is that there's a measure here of progress, or really regression, right? 7, attempts to quit, right? I'm giving up my phone for Lent, and then within that first week, boy, oh boy, how hard is it? How hard is it? Okay, time spent around acquisition. If I don't have my phone before I leave out of the house, right, I will be late for that appointment that I need to get to. Even though I know how to get there without my apps, right? Even though I know where I'm going, I gotta have the phone before I leave, right? This is an example of time spent around acquisition. But again, it's even to the point of, right, say for example, my dealer, right, has run out of X substance that I'm looking to get from him, right? But I know that if I drive 3 hours north, I can get what I want, right? And I'm willing to do that, right? I'm willing to do that because it's so important for me to have. Physical, psychological issues. Okay. So here's where we really start to get the rubber meets the road sort of stuff, right? Where essentially what our use is doing to us is causing us literal problems within our person, within ourselves, right? Within the way that we think, within the way that we act, within the way that we behave, even to our physical health, right? Losing sleep would be one of these examples of a physical issue that derives from using something, okay? 10, use instead of pastimes. So things that we find to be enjoyable or have found to be enjoyable in the past are now being substituted for this thing. Which again, if we're keeping that device inside of our mind, right, and if we're thinking about it and we're realizing, wow, this is all stuff that I've done, we're now into this category of being addicted, right? We're into this category of being addicted. And my goal here is not to get everybody leaving thinking that they're addicted to their phones. Although, would that be the worst thing? Right? And then number 11, craving. Craving. Okay. So craving meaning like, again, not just that I'm without it, but to say that I'm always thinking about when am I going to get that next bump? When am I going to get that next opportunity to use? When am I going to be able to check my phone? Right? Again, it's this whole thing of, right, we're really needing to shift the way that we think about addiction. Okay, so that in and of itself is the clinical definition. Okay? Agree or disagree? Are we all right? Yes. Yeah. Fantastic. So now what I want to offer as food for thought is a spiritual definition. Okay? And this spiritual definition is one which I think can kind of take us to a place where we're no longer just thinking about psychological and physiological, right? But we're thinking about how is this really affecting me? How is this affecting my heart of hearts, right? And so this is, we live in the world's delusions. Our addictions condemn us to futile quests in a distant country. And this is a reference to the prodigal son, right? So that's Luke 15:13. So when you think about that prodigal son and how he left his father's house where he had everything, right? He had everything he could have ever wanted in his father's house, but he left it in pursuit of these futile quests, right? Leaving us to face endless sense of disillusionment, while our sense of self remains unfulfilled, right? So chasing after that social media dream here, okay? Chasing after this existence that really is not real, this existence that's totally and completely contrived. Seeking something from it and realizing we're actually not getting anything in return. We have wandered far away from our Father's home. Okay? So this is what I offer forward as the spiritual definition. It comes to us from a really wonderful work called The Return of the Prodigal Son by a Catholic theologian named Henry Nouwen. Again, a great book that I would encourage everyone to look up. And we're going to now take this to the next level and go for an orthodox definition. First, there is provocation. Then, a coupling with the provocation. Then, assent to it. And again, keep in mind the spelling of this word assent, which is not to ascend, right? But in the sense of, right, we're in agreement with it. So we have this provocation, whatever it may be, right? Maybe it's the buzz, right? The dreaded buzz. Oh my gosh, I'm in the middle of a talk, I'm in the middle of a conversation, and I feel a buzz in my pocket, right? There's the provocation. Then there's a coupling with it. Okay, well, let me just check this real quick, right? And then there's the assent to it. Now I'm giving justification to the fact that our interaction has been interrupted completely by this provocation. And then captivity to it. Is this not captivity when you see somebody like this in the middle of a conversation with you? Is that not captivity? And then passion, grown habitual and continuous. This is how the Holy Fathers describe the stages through which who? The devil gets us. The devil gets us. So this comes to us from St. Philotheos of Sinai, 40 texts of watchfulness from the Philokalia, which again is a really beautiful compilation that maybe we can check out someday. So, questions, comments, concerns about that before we move on? Because I want to keep track here and make sure we have time for questions at the end. Okay, so we're all on the same page, yes, with the clinical, with the spiritual, and with the orthodox definition. I hope we see that we're going to a certain place. Now, out there are many models and theories on addiction. Can you all name any model or theory of addiction? Any ideas? Models or theories of addiction? We actually already named one. We said that it was an illness.
Yeah, there was McCluskey, I think, had a theory of it's a mental illness.
Okay, for sure. Yeah, for sure. So we have different kinds of modeling. Somewhere in this notion that it's all a matter of willpower, right? I can will myself into and out of addiction, right? Or we also had mentioned already the disease model.
The disease,
right?
that's the one, the disease model.
For sure, which is to say that I'm suffering from addiction, right? I've come into this place, this ailment of addiction, and I'm suffering from addiction just in the same way that I would suffer from any other kind of sickness. It's not so much about how I got that sickness as it is to say that I'm suffering from the sickness. And so this also becomes kind of like the medical model. Any other ideas about models out there? I don't totally expect us to have this one on tap, but here's some of those models. So there's the moral model, right? This notion that, oh, well, because you're a bad person, that's why you're an addict. There's the disease model, which we talked about. There's the socio-dynamic model, which is to say that because I was born in a certain place and grew up around a certain group of people, I'm obviously going to be addicted. There's the psychodynamic model, which is to say that because I suffered some kind of trauma, right, or some kind of experience within my life, that's why I'm an addict. Right? There's the biopsychosocial model, right, which is this really beautiful model that combines together this notion that maybe I'm predispositioned biologically, and that maybe that predisposition plays into some of that trauma, and that trauma is informed by my environment. Again, beautiful. There's the genetic model, right? This genetic model, which is to say that I've actually been born into this predisposition, and that predisposition can be traced down from generation to generation, right? And again, credit to all of these models. There's even the epigenetic model, which is to say that my genes have actually been transformed by my environment, so that way I can suffer from addiction because of the way that my genes have been transformed by my environment. And again, all of these models, beautiful, awesome, amazing models, and all of them have their application. But in the church, based on those two definitions that we talked about, the spiritual and the orthodox, we take on what's called the psychosomatic. Okay? And so the psychosomatic model is one that maybe we're heard of, maybe we're a little familiar with it, but I want to just break it down for us real quick. Okay? So there it is, psychosomatic model. You got it? All right, let's move on to the next slide. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so the psychosomatic model. You have on one side the psyche, right? And the other side, the soma, which being good Greeks, some of us, right? We know that psyche translates to soul, right? And soma translates to psyche oftentimes speaks about what? The mind, and only the mind, right? It oftentimes isolates the mind and thinks along the lines of psychology is actually the study of the mind. Incorrect. Psychology is the study of the soul. So this requires us to understand what is the soul, right? Great question, because the church has an answer. The church gives us what is referred to as the tripart soul, which means that our soul can be broken down into kind of 3 areas of interest, right? Those 3 areas of interest are first and foremost the logos, right? Which again, the logos is what the West associates the psyche with directly. The West believes, right? Again, when we're talking about the soul, it's logically driven, right? And so it's all happening up here inside of our brains. But there's another part, the themos, right? The appetitive, which is to say that these are the internal drivers, right? And we're going to get deeper into the appetitive in just a second. And then there's also the pneuma, right? But do you know there are 3 places inside of your body where you hold cells that are capable of neurological activity? We probably know the first place, right? The first place being where?
The brain.
The brain, for sure, absolutely. Totally and completely capable of neurological activity. Do you know where the other 2 are?
The stomach?
The stomach, very good, absolutely. And the third?
The heart?
What?
Heart?
The heart, yes. So think about this now for a second in consideration of the tripart soul. And think about it in terms of how the church talks about it, the language that the church uses. Okay? So we acknowledge the logical center. We acknowledge that what takes place up here, the reasoning, right? What takes place up here, the thinking, what takes place up here are memories, for sure, but that's not all of it, right? We also have to recognize that there are these other drivers, which we say, I've got a gut feeling about it. Great, you absolutely do. Acknowledge it and go with it, because that gut feeling is probably coming from one of your appetitive drivers, which again, we're going to clarify and get into those in just a second, right? But then also saying, well, my heart isn't in it, right? My heart isn't in it. Or it is, right? I'm giving my heart to you. Right? Because my heart is actually doing some thinking of its own. And this is why within the church we speak about this place of the heart of hearts, the place wherein which the Spirit resides. Okay? So thinking now along these terms, and when we're talking about addiction, right? When this psyche, right, when our soul has a totally unmitigated existence, which is to say that nothing is trying to rule that existence, okay? It's also the place of addiction. And so what takes precedence in this kind of addictions, of unmitigated / addictive experience, is the themos, that appetitive. And so that's to say, whatever it is that is driving me internally, I'm not thinking about it, nor am I feeling it, right? But it's a driver. It's something that's pushing me. And so I'm going to take that push towards whatever it is, and I'm going to rationalize it with logic. And I'm going to totally and completely disregard any feelings that I may have about it, any emotions that I'm experiencing. And I'm totally disregarding at this point in time any sort of spiritual existence, right? Because it's not about the spiritual when we're driven by the appetitive. Right? What it's about is acquiring what the appetitive is telling us to get. Within this sort of, yes, sir?
Under pneuma, what is the word in
Insensitive. Thank you for asking me. Yes, absolutely. Insensitive. Insensitive. This is the word that's given to it. And so when we're talking about the pneuma, what we're talking about are those things that are unseen, those experiences that we have that are unwilled by us and yet unseen. So again, this is under those categories we see emotions, right? You don't will your emotions. I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm going to feel a certain way, right? I'm not going to think to myself, now is a good time for me to be sad, right? Now is a good time for me to be joyful. Now is a good time for me to be incredibly upset, right? No, this is an experience that is authentic, that is coming from a center, right? Our heart of hearts, right? It's coming from this place of feeling. It's also this same place where we identify as having experiences of spirituality, right? So I would imagine you all being here tonight, you've had an experience of spirituality. Maybe it's in that beautiful church that you have across the street here. Or maybe it's someplace else. Maybe it's at a monastery somewhere. Or maybe it's on the top of a mountain, right? But ultimately what we're saying is that there's a spiritual experience that each and every one of us can acknowledge and say was totally unwilled by me, right? So this is what we mean when we say insensitive, okay? So that's thrown on the back burner completely when we allow for our appetitive desires to run our life. For Plato and Freud, that's good. That was the first. For Plato and Freud, there we go. Plato and Freud, they saw this a little bit differently. They saw that the Vasilevs, the ruler of our existence, of our psychosomatic existence, should in fact be the ration, right? Because up here we have the gatekeeper. Up here we have the capacity to take in everything that is we're feeling, to take in everything that it is that we're desiring, and we have the ability to process it, right? We just feed it all into the big organic computer up here, and it comes up with a decision for us, right? Which is putting the themos, the appetitive, second, and ultimately still bringing pneuma, the insensitive, to a place where we're on the back, right? But what does the church say? The church tells us, no, the pneuma, our heart of hearts, your emotional center, right? This is the place that should be reigning supreme, because this is the place in which we receive instruction from God, right? We call it a consciousness sometimes, but ultimately we have a certain type of way that we feel about certain type of situations. We know when we're doing something that is good for us versus when we do something that is bad for us. Just going back to that example of driving in the car and picking up the phone to text somebody, we know it, don't we? We know that this is not a good thing to do. We know that this is a hazardous activity. We know that this is something that could ruin our lives and somebody else's by simply not paying attention to what we need to be paying attention to, right? And what the church is telling us is saying, listen to that. Listen to that. There's wisdom there. There's life there. There's a source there that is trying to direct us towards something. And then use your ration to help you determine how to direct that. How do you direct that emotion that you're feeling? How do you direct that spiritual experience that you're having? How are you going to turn that into something that is beneficial to you? And ultimately, taming of the desires, right? Taming that appetitive self. Which again, here we find ourselves within the great Lenten journey, right? And this is exactly the intent of fasting. Precisely the intent of fasting. It's to prioritize the spiritual over the physical. To align our internal existence in a kind of a way that helps us actualize what the church wants for us, right? Which is to be spiritually driven people. Okay? So I want to talk for just a moment about the passions. The passions which oftentimes come from this place, the themos, the appetitive. The passions themselves, as St. Maximus tells us, are not evil, but they become so when they are not kept within their proper bounds. Okay? So it gives justification to this thing that we're talking about here. Look at that beautiful painting, right? Adam and Eve being cast out of paradise. The passions, tapati, are sufferings, right? Resulting from the fall. They are the sickness of the soul which obscure our vision of God and can enslave us to our own desires. So now we're talking about that place of the themos, clarifying here what is taking place in that themos, that appetitive center of ourselves. Okay? The themos is where we find the root source of what we're going to refer to now as natural blameless passions, right? These are the things that St. Maximus was talking about, right? Which is to say that there are internal drivers that we suffer from because of the fall. Can any of you think of some of those things that we just naturally suffer from, that we are not to be blamed for, that are a result of the fall from paradise? What did you just finish doing? Eating. You have a hunger. This is a totally natural and blameless passion, right? This is something that nobody's going to shame you for, and if they are, then shame on them, okay? Right? These people. Okay, but seriously, right? Each and every one of us is going to have a hunger. Each and every one of us is going to have some kind of a thirst, right? These are kinds of natural and blameless passions that we all suffer from. And so here we have a list of natural and blameless passions: stress, hunger, thirst, sex drive, fear, fatigue, shelter, pain. These are all things that we suffer that really aren't because things that we need to be blamed for, right? This is just a matter of our human existence. Now, what St. Maximus was talking about and what the church is consistently trying to drive home to us is that these natural and blameless passions can lead us one place or the other. It's just a matter of what we do with them, okay? And so they can lead us to a place of virtue, which is to say that I'm going to see that stress and I'm going to couple it with faith. I'm going to couple it with persistence. I'm going to couple it with a pursuit towards what I know to be good. And I am going to become patient. Right? Patient. But if we allow that stress, to seat itself as king of our internal existence, where do we find ourselves? We find ourselves in a place of absolute anxiety. Right? And again, this is not to say that we're sitting here saying people with anxiety disorders are to blame for their anxiety disorder, but this is more along the lines of commonplace type of stuff, right? If I'm going to take the stress of, again, something like time, okay? Time is something that stresses all of us, and I'm going to allow that time to stress me to the point of anxiety, right? I'm going to let that anxiety run my life. I'm going to let that anxiety be short with people who need my time. I'm going to let that anxiety be frustrated with my kids as we're trying to get out the door for school, right? I'm going to let that anxiety do things to me because I'm not coupling it properly with faith, right? I'm not pursuing it. I'm not using it as an opportunity to pursue patience. Right? Does that make sense to everybody? And so here we have kind of like a listing, right? So hunger, the virtue being moderation, which is what we're doing by fasting, right? We're pursuing a life of moderation by fasting. Let us be clear, and forgive me, I'm not sure what Father Tom has told you, and I hope what I'm about to say doesn't scandalize anybody. But when you're fasting, you're not giving anything up for Jesus. You're not sacrificing something the way that Jesus sacrificed himself. You're not. That's not the point of fasting. Because when we look at the cross and we see him up there, can any of us honestly say, Lord, because I gave up meat and dairy, I know how you feel? No, absolutely not. That's not the point of the fast. The point of the fast is to humble ourselves. Right? The point of the fast is to bring this natural and blameless passion of hunger to its knees before the soul. So that way we can say, I don't need hunger to drive my life. I don't need a double cheeseburger to get through the day. Right? I can humble that hunger and I can bring it to a place of moderation. Which again, when we look to that place of unmitigated natural, blameless passions, when we allow that natural and blameless passion of hunger to run our life, to become the prime directive of our existence, absolutely, it brings us to a place of gluttony. It brings us to a place where we are pursuing Epicurean desires above and beyond anything else. we will sacrifice massive amounts of money to have the perfect experience, all because we've allowed hunger to run our life. And so, with this fast, let's be clear, that's what we're trying to eliminate, right? And so, this is also the place where I bring this sidebar to say, going out for a lobster dinner during Lent is missing the point of the fast. Okay? Going to the grocery store and checking the labels on every single package to see, does this contain meat or dairy? Oh, great, yes, coconut oil I can have. Okay, great, Beyond Burgers I can have. Right? Again, it's this whole thing, right? We're not supplementing. That's not the point of the fast, right? The point of the fast is to simplify. We're simplifying. So that way we can pursue a higher existence, a better way of life. We can make more time now, knowing that there is a pot full of fajitas in the fridge, and I don't have to worry for the next week about what I'm having for lunch. Right? There's more time. And by having more time, we're reducing that stress that's caused by time. Okay, so you see how this all kind of doubles down on itself? This is the root place of addiction, everybody. It really is. Right? I mean, again, I've sat across the table from countless people. Right? And what I can say with certainty is that when we go down this list of natural and blameless passions, when we ask ourselves, what is it that you're trying to get rid of? Right? Okay, you're popping Percocets like M&M's. What is it that you're trying to get rid of? I don't know, I'm trying to get rid of the pain. Okay, great, let's talk about that. Or I don't know, I'm trying to get rid of the fear. I'm trying to get rid of this fear that I have. Right? I'm trying to get rid of the stress. I'm trying to escape. Right? I'm trying to cut off any need for interacting with others because I'm seeking that shelter. But I'm seeking it in a bad way. Right? I'm seeking it in my phone. I'm seeking it by cutting people off instead of trying to become a part of a community that I know loves me and cares about. Right? And so this is really what this is all about. This is the root place of addiction as we understand it from the church's perspective. Okay, so now that we're all on the same page about what addiction may or may not be, okay, we're going to go to this place now where I just want to add a plug. I want to make a plug here. What do we do about it, right? Because again, it's not that we're going to sit here and say like, okay, so St. George Downey, what you got to do is you got to set up a rehab, right? You got to get yourselves all, turn and convert this beautiful space that you have into a space full of beds. Make it residential so that way people can live here. Like again, no, it just becomes too overwhelming too quickly, right? And so we as the church need something accessible to us that allows us a place where in which we can do the work of the church that complements what's already being done out there. We're not going to substitute what's being offered clinically. We're not going to substitute what's being offered medically. And it's crazy if we think that somehow we're going to provide that, right? What we can provide is spiritual direction. And that is what the St. Anastasia Fellowship gives us an opportunity to do, right? And so the St. Anastasia Fellowship essentially is a support group that can be based out of any and every parish in the United States. The requirements are very limited, right? And what the purpose of this support group is to create a compassionate and Christ-centered environment informed by clinical understanding and rooted in Orthodox Christian tradition, where those struggling with addiction can, number one, heal the wounded soul. Number two, find true sobriety, which again, this is another Orthodox Christian concept, sobriety. Nepsis is another word for it, right? So nepsis. Okay, this is what we're pursuing, this is what we're wanting, right? It's a true sobriety of self, a sobriety of soul. And number three, cultivate a peaceful life. Which again, I know that we think that sounds like a pipe dream for just about anybody, but what are we really talking about here? Okay, what we're saying is that with this first goal, we're really wanting to do what we kind of just did. And that is to find the soul in a way that makes it approachable, right? And help ourselves to begin the process of healing those fissures that may have taken place along the way. Number two, we're going to focus on the passions. We're going to focus in on them with this support group. We're really going to talk about them. We're going to bring them out, because what we're going to find is that the people who are showing up from this kind of a group, right, it's not just people who are addicted, right? But the people who are going to show up for this group are friends and family of people who suffer from addiction as well. And we're going to get them together in a nice big circle, and we're going to talk about these passions and how they don't just affect the people who are suffering from addiction, but how they affect each and every one of us. Because I think what we're going to find is that each and every one of us struggle with something like this in some way, shape, or form. And number three, as far as finding peace is concerned, man, this is something that the church really has something to say about as we engage through praxis, right? Praxis means everything that happens across the way here. That's praxis. Praxis means anytime we have an opportunity for true Christian fellowship, whether it's a Bible study or a support group like this, or even just getting together and so that way we can pray with one another, right? This is praxis. To discuss, to understand, to live out this Christian experience in a very palpable kind of a way. So, you want to start a fellowship here? You don't have to say yes or no. Just think about it. Think about it before you say no. So the first step, supplicate. Supplicate. Anybody know what supplicate means?
Right.
Pray! Absolutely! This is the first step, which I think is an easy step. I think it's a very easy step here. Anywhere who is already existing as a church. This is an easy step to take. And so our supplication, right, as a community who maybe wants to think about starting a fellowship, right, it begins with paraklesis. Paraklesis to Saint Anastasia. Right? Saint Anastasia we've identified as one of these great saints who is an intercessor for people who suffer from addiction. And so what we're going to do here after we leave, okay, and I'm going to allow some time for questions. I think I went a little over the time that I had hoped to, but I appreciate your patience with me. We're going to go into the church, and we're going to offer up paraklesis to Saint Anastasia, the pharmacologist, pharmacolithia, okay, who again has been identified as somebody who really does some serious work with people with addictions. I can offer my own personal testimony to say that not only have the people who I have prayed for during the supplicatory canon to Saint Anastasia been directly affected, like I've seen it happen, I've seen these miracles of healing take place through the intercessory work of Saint Anastasia, through the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. But what I can tell you as well is that as a personal testimony, okay, I've been affected. I've been directly affected. I too, like Father Tommy, had a nasty coffee addiction. Right? I know, I'm serious. I know, we laugh about it, we giggle about it, we do the same thing with sugar. Right? We say, oh, Father, you're being crazy, sugar and coffee. We're Greeks, we're not going to give those up. Right? But really think about your relationship with it. Think about your relationship with it, because mine was causing me physical harm. Mine was bringing me to a place where if I had coffee, if I had any bit of caffeine, like heavy dose of caffeine, immediately my stomach would just become totally and completely inflamed. And I would try and just kind of push my way through it, and that was all well and good up until I ended up in the hospital. And as I'm sitting there in the hospital, the only thing that I'm thinking about is these prayers. These prayers that I've been praying to Saint Anastasia. And how it is that I've been affected by these prayers. And how it is that I have decided to overlook those prayers and think that I'm somehow separate from everybody else. But then at that moment while I was sitting there in the hospital, I realized, you're doing the work, Saint Anastasia, and I'm just not listening. You're doing the work, and that's why I'm here. That's why I'm in this hospital now, because I'm trying to ignore the work that you're doing within me. And I can say, thankfully and wholeheartedly, that for the last 2.5 years now, I've been completely off of coffee, and it's changed my life in a very beneficial way. It's not just the stomach pain, it's an entire attitude, it's an entire mentality, it's an entire way of life that, again, is one that I would encourage anybody and everybody to try. But that's me. So, we're starting the supplication. And so here I'm going to read to you what it is that I would really like to say to this crowd, but St. Gregory Palamas already said it so much better. If you are one who still falls into many maladies and afflictions of the soul, and such indeed am I, and I must continually cry out to God, heal me, for for I have sinned against you, then it is unwise for you to leave off prayer before being healed, and of your own accord to occupy yourself with something else, which is to say that whatever it is that we have in our minds right now, that maybe was checking those boxes, maybe it's your phone, maybe it's something else, maybe it's a substance, maybe it's a behavior, whatever it is, bring that forward tonight before Saint Anastasia. Bring that forward and say, Saint Anastasia, help the Lord to work this work within me. Help me to work this work within me. Help me to get past this shame, this stigma, this thing that's keeping me from putting this out there as something that I'm struggling with and suffering from. Help me to help myself. Step 2, facilitate. So this takes a little bit more work. We need to be able to appoint and identify a facilitator for the group. The kind of person that we want to have in mind for this job is not your parish priest. I can tell you, it's crazy for a parish priest to try and do this group twice every month as somebody who is a parish priest who's doing this group twice every month. So what you want to be able to identify within your community is somebody who is either a clinician or a person with 10 plus years of experience in recovery. Either one of these people are going to be great individuals who you can kind of appoint and look to as a group leader and facilitator, somebody who can help walk alongside of, not guide, right? Because that's not what we're really doing here. That's not what we're doing at the church. We're not guiding. We're walking alongside of each other, right? And in doing so, we also ask that this person be somebody who is faithful and very aware of what's taking place. Those roles and responsibilities are something along like facilitating these group discussions, offering support, and a connection to the parish. So this is the kind of person that is going to take somebody from that group and bring them to Father Tom's office to say, Father Tom, I'd like to introduce you to Susanna. Susanna's been having a lot of trouble with XYZ, and she wants me to make this connection today. And I want to hand Susanna off to you, Father Tom, to help her do the work that she needs to do. Okay? But it's also community connections as well, right? So this is somebody who's hopefully going to be knowledgeable of the resources that you have within the community that can help people who are addicted, because I've had it happen, right? Where I'm having a support group and I've got a bunch of very stable people within that group, and in walks Joe Schmo from off the street who's walking in smelling like booze, who's walking in stumbling to try and find a chair. It's got to be that facilitator who then walks over to Joe Schmo and says, hey bud, why don't you come with me? I've got a place that I'd like to take you tonight, right? And again, this is where that experience as a clinician or as somebody in recovery is super helpful. Outreach, and again, making more events like this take place, some ethical considerations, but again, this is more for the person who this might be. For now, we're saying we're praying about it. For now, we're saying Father Tom is going to be offering paradisies once a month, maybe twice a month, to Saint Anastasia. And whoever wants to show up to that group, that's what we're going to do. Those are the people who are going to be there. We're not going to start with the group until we've been able to identify this person, but we're not going to be able to really identify this person until Saint Anastasia identifies this person for us. Okay? Final third step, communicate. Okay, so get in touch with me. If this is something that interests you all, again, I'm not here to sell you on anything because I don't receive any real benefit other than to know that this is just another one of those beacons that I can send people to when I get a phone call from somebody up in San Bernardino who needs a place to go, or wanting some pastoral support, or a community, right, where they're looking for somebody who's going to be supportive of somebody who's had a history of addiction, and they're not going to go someplace where they're feeling ostracized or where they're feeling unwelcome, right? And so this could be one of those places. I hope that it is. At the very least, I would love it to hear that you're on board with the paradisies, which you're about to all experience. But before we do that, I'm going to ask questions, comments, concerns. Yes, sir.
First, thank you, Father, for coming to our parish.
Thank you for having me.
how can that be here?
Yeah, it's an awesome question, and it's something that the church fathers deal a lot with, right? They immediately kind of place this notion of like addictive thinking, is what we kind of call it within the clinical world, into this place of the Greek word is logismi, right? Which is to say that there's these little thoughts, and these little thoughts are just constantly pestering us like little flies, right? Flying around inside of our brain. And sometimes we get stuck into what the good fellowships of AA and NA talk about as stinking thinking, right? Where you get kind of caught in this loop of thought, right? And that loop of thought becomes this sort of thing where like, oh man, I'm obsessing about this, right? And so what oftentimes is prescribed by the church fathers is this notion of like, well, what we have to do in these instances is kind of substitute that thought, right? You have to interrupt that thought. The most direct interruption that's oftentimes prescribed is the interruption with the Jesus prayer, right? Something that's super accessible to us, something that's easily repeatable, something in which we won't be super distracted. But again, ultimately, it's not a quick fix, right? It's the sort of thing where like that's going to work for that moment and that point in time, but it's a process too, right? And this is something that's also acknowledged over and over within the literature from our church, is that this really is a process of redemption, right? It's a process for us to get to the place where we can say we have peace within our mind, or when we're thinking, the only thought that comes to mind is the word of his resurrection, right? And again, this is the sort of thing that we want to really try and shift our thinking into, of like this thought that I'm obsessing over, where is it leading me, right? And this is where that help of understanding where it's coming from even comes into play, right? Because if I can identify where that thought is coming from, right? Like if I'm thinking about this thing over and over and over and over again, and I know that this thing is coming from a place that isn't leading me to life, but rather that is leading me to a place of death or destruction or, unrest, right? Then that also empowers us, right? To come to this place of like, oh, wow, I have to interrupt this thought, right? I have to stop this thinking, so that way I can find that place of life, so that way I can pursue that existence that I know is better than this. Does that make sense? Right on, thank you, great question. Any other questions, comments, concerns? I'm very concerned. Yeah.
Can you tell us the story of St. Anastasia and their, affiliation with helping this group?
Yeah, sure. So St. Anastasia was a saint within the early centuries of the church. Okay, she's identified in a lot of different ways, but I think the one that's most consistent is that she was kind of a regal background. Okay, so she had means, in other words. She used those means for good. Right? She used those means mostly to help people who were preparing for martyrdom. Right? So this would have been during the first centuries of Christianity when the church was being persecuted, right, by the Roman Empire. Okay? And so what she would do is she would find these people who were being persecuted for the faith, right? She would identify them, she would go to them, and where she gets this notion of being a pharmacologist, right, is she would basically go to their cells in between sufferings, right? And so, you're being lashed one day for being a Christian, you're imprisoned at night. It's St. Anastasia who's secretly sneaking into that cell, or maybe even, again, there's different stories, different variations, maybe even paying off jailers, right, to allow herself to go in and offer healing, offer ointment, offer prayer for these people who are suffering a martyrdom for Christ. And so I think that this is really where we get into this place. She herself also was a martyr, but this is also where we get into this place of like, it makes perfect sense then, right? That this person who's offering these very natural remedies, right? Which again, I think when we're thinking about the way in which a lot of these substances that we're talking about have been derived, or even the behaviors, right? These are natural things that have ultimately been kind of, they've been toxified, right? They've been turned into something that is poisonous. And they've been made to, in order to kind of like alter our reality, right? And so what she's coming then is with some of those natural healing substances, right? She's coming to us with these natural healing substances this remedy and apply it with faith, right? Apply it knowing that you're going to be granted healing because of this. It's not going to hurt you, right? It's not being done to alter your reality. It's being done to bring you into the reality of the church, right? It's being done to strengthen you, in other words. And again, you'll hear within the paráclesis some of this beautiful language that's used to talk about the healing that's offered by Saint Anastasia, and a lot of that is derived from her actual story of life of the healing. So that's the truncated version. There's extended versions available as well, but not tonight. Any other questions, comments, concerns? You're all okay? All right. You sure? Awfully quiet for having received so much information. Yes.
How many, I guess, parishes have a Santa Anastasia?
This is a great question. So the current count that I have of kind of like budding St. Anastasia fellowships is somewhere around 10 or 12 across the nation. We have one that is, we have 2 or 3 that are fully functioning. Those 2 or 3 is the one that we run out of Yonkers. There's also one in Knoxville, Tennessee, and one also in Memphis. Oh, sorry, 4. Another one down in Tarpon Springs, Florida as well. Yeah. So, is that roughly 16 total? Yeah.
Thank you so much for tonight.
Absolutely.
I was curious, the clinician that you're seeking, do they need to be Orthodox?
Sorry, one more time.
So,
The
I guess,
clinician.
yeah, do they need to be
Does the
Orthodox?
clinician need to be Orthodox? So I would say that the clinician needs to at least be like a catechumen, you know, somebody
Yeah.
who's
I think it would
familiar.
be great if they were, I was just curious.
Yeah, somebody who's familiar with the church.
Yeah.
Because really the material that's provided for the group itself is all very Orthodox-based material, right? So they're going to be talking about Jesus Christ. They're going to be talking about the saints. They're going to be talking about the prayer services that are offered at the church, the sacraments, right? Engaging in the sacramental life. And in doing all of that, we definitely want somebody who's in agreement with what they're prescribing or what's being prescribed by the church. Does that make sense?
Do you need the parishioners' help to find this person, or are you just kind of?
I think every parish would want to kind of look inwardly first.
Right.
If there's somebody, maybe say for example, you have a situation where, say, this parish is willing to be a sponsor for a St. Anastasia fellowship, but you don't have that person within your parish, then there could also be this notion of kind of like looking to some of our other local resources to say, hey, St. George of Downey is willing to start a St. Anastasia fellowship. You know, you over there at St. Sophia, would you like to come and be the group facilitator for this? But like I said, I think too, what I've noticed in some of these other groups, St. Anastasia through the paráclesis does have a way of kind of identifying that person for us, you know, because a lot of times this will be somebody who comes to the paráclesis services and at some point approaches Father Tom and says, hey, I'm a psychologist and I would like to help out with this effort. You know? But that's the way it's done in other parishes. So, you know, it's, yeah, good question. Anyone else? Yes?
Thank you so much for offering all these insights. Inspired a lot of self-reflection, which is a good thing.
Absolutely.
The group format that you like to see, is that one that has like a certain curriculum to it? Like, okay, cool.
Yes, yeah, totally. So we're in kind of this stage with the addictions ministry where we're formalizing that curriculum and putting it into kind of like almost like a workbook sort of format. But for now, the way that it's been working is we're just about to hire kind of a program manager who's going to be responsible for corresponding with anybody who's interested in starting up a group or who's already started a group. And we kind of try and provide content to those groups. But really what I think people find is that once they get it started and once they get it going, the content really kind of is self-providing because it's all from the church. And once you've kind of got your mind set on what it is that we're trying to do here, right, and talk about addiction using church language, the resources are endless because we have literally like almost
Father Tom? Shall we head over to the church and supplicate?